All right, this is Boyd Barrett again, and I have another session with one of the authors that I've done an audiobook with. Um, and I like to do these interviews with the authors so that the people can see what happens behind the scenes. And today, uh, I'm really excited because this is a book that we made into an audiobook, and it went live about a month and a half ago. And it's called The Roads to Golgotha. And the author is Leonard Gill. And Leonard is here, and we're going to talk about that book in a little bit. But Leonard, uh, I want you to just kind of take it for a little bit and tell us a little bit about your background, what your life has been like and what led you into writing. You've written more than just this book. You've written several novels.
I have, yeah, that's true. I'm for the audience. I live in Wales in the United Kingdom, and I live up the top of a mountain in the
Wow.
middle of nowhere. Uh, and for for 30 years, I was a police officer in Liverpool, which is the nearest major city, I suppose. Really,
Hmm.
it's about 50 miles away from here.
Right.
And when I retired in 1970, sorry, I joined in 75. When I retired in 2005, I um, I was taken on by the United Nations as a consultant, and I worked for the United Nations DPKO in Africa, and then worked for the International Red Cross in Asia, mainly in the Middle East. So my my inspiration for writing, really, I've always wanted to write a novel, always, and I was working as a policeman, and by the year 2000, I had about 25 years service, and I was a boss then. I suppose the equivalent of a captain
Hmm.
in America. And my job then was in charge of an operations room. So if there was a major incident, or there was a riot, or stuff happening, I had a team of blokes who were in the office there, and we would plan the response, the police response, and then organise it and then run it, just like a
Hmm.
military operation.
Hmm.
And it sort of occurred to me at the time, these officers have all got little personalities. So every man's got his own little personality. There's always the joker. There's always the one who's very serious, you know, and and we're all working under really high pressure. Uh, but somehow the event happens, and then it's finished, and then within hours you come back in the next day, and well, there's another operation in the making. And I thought, you know, is this the way it's always been? Can you imagine in the past if there was something that's happened, a big operation? Was there an operations room there? So that got me thinking, and and I thought to myself, well, it'd be actually quite nice to write a novel about that. But I'd never written a novel. I had no idea. And you yourself must have been in this position.
Hmm.
I'd start writing, and then I wouldn't get anywhere, and I'd go, "Oh, this is, I can't do this. I can't do this," and I put it down. I put it down, and I toyed with the writing for years, and then I went as a consultant. But this thought kept on at me all the time. I wanted to do it anyway. I settled on the crucifixion. I don't know why I settled on the crucifixion. Probably because it was a history making event, and it
Hmm.
had all the elements that I wanted. And wouldn't it be nice to write the crucifixion from the perspective of a policeman, of me, in the operations room?
Hmm.
And well, surely in Jerusalem then there was a chief of police who was a Jewish chief of police, and he would be my opposite number, and there would be tensions, uh,
Hmm.
like between the FBI and the local police, I suppose. So I did that, and then I was consulting, and I was working. As I say, I was working in Africa, worked in North Africa, went to Spain, and I thought, oh, this is a really good location. So I looked at Spain and I made loads of notes, and then I was in Libya just after Gaddafi got killed, and
Mm-hmm.
made loads of notes about that place as well. And it was like being in the French Revolution, and visited loads of Roman sites, and then actually got deployed into Palestine with the Red Cross, and into Israel. So I had the honor of going to Jerusalem, and I looked at Jerusalem, and I looked at all of that, and then when ISIS kicked off, I was working for the British Foreign Office and for the US State Department, and I got sent to a place called Gaziantep in Turkey, which is right on the border with Syria.
Uh-huh.
And I got there, I found out that this was an old Roman legionary base. So I made notes about that. And so in my head, I had all these places I'd been to, and all these notebooks with descriptions of different places. I thought, okay, well, maybe I should go back to writing the book. And I tried, and it wouldn't get, and it wouldn't work. And then I sort of got obsessed with the Anglo-Saxons and the Romans and the Dark Ages in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit, and I'd retired by that time. I'd retired about 12 months, and I was sat in my cabin in the field at the back one day, and there was nobody there. It was quiet. I don't know what it was like in America during COVID, but there was no traffic. Nobody was anywhere. Everybody was locked down, and all there was the occasional farmer driving past, and it was quiet, the birds, and it was like being in the middle of nowhere. And I sat down and I thought, right, I'm going to write a historical diary as if this is 400. And I ended up writing a novel about me in,
Mm-hmm.
in the Dark Ages. And it got me going, and eventually I got it published. And it was okay. I thought it was okay, but I suppose it was slightly pedestrian. But once I'd written one, the second one came easier, and then the third one came easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I published these on Amazon, and I had this series of novels which are called the Evening of Empire series. And then, because I've got 6 children and I've got 12 grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody says, "Oh, you should write about your adventures." So I wrote an autobiography, and I published that as well, and that's called "Leave Me a Line."
Right.
Anyway, having done all of this, I was really into the writing, and I'm getting better, and I thought I was getting better. I think my writing's improved. And my wife said to me about 18 months ago, "Do you know you never ever did that novel about the crucifixion? You should try."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Okay, I will." And I sat down, and I got all my notebooks out of all the places, and the characters just sprung to life out of me, and I was able to place these characters in these places that I'd experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I used my experiences from the operations office, and my experiences working for the Red Cross and working for the United Nations, and these places, and that's how the book evolved, really.
Wow. Wow. Well, you can tell if you either read or listen to this book, you can tell that there's reality behind it. What there's experience behind it, the places, the types of operations, um, and it really is obvious that you knew what you were talking about. I loved narrating it, beautifully written. And it's interesting. So sometimes it's just the right time. Maybe when you first had the idea, it wasn't the right time, but that idea
Yeah, I think
that
it
idea was
was.
what got you into the process, and then now was the right time for this one.
Yeah, I think my writing has definitely improved, and the storyline, as I say, it almost wrote itself,
Hmm.
really. But I think what's changed from when I first started writing, back in 2020 and now, is um, I've adopted a more episodic style.
Hmm.
When the first book I wrote, I had to say everything in order and continuous. It was like a diary.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, but but this novel, the Roads to Golgotha, in my head, it's a movie, you know,
Yes.
and
Uh-huh.
I've tried to write it as a movie. Really, it could almost be a movie script, really.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the six the six main characters, the two
Mm-hmm.
politicians, the two police officers, and the two spies.
Yes.
Um, I try to cut each character I try to cut into their lives so that
Uh-huh.
each starts off as a child, then they're a teenager, then they're a young adult going their separate ways,
Right.
but they all end up in the same place, and only at that point can they start to interact. And
Mm-hmm.
I had as um, my example really. Do you ever remember there used to be a series called Hill Street Blues?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, so I was obsessed with Hill Street Blues in the 1980s. Absolutely obsessed with it. I mean, it was the most realistic series I'd ever seen about the police. And so the dialogue that I've tried to put in that you express fantastically. I really I can't praise you enough. Um, um, the dialogue is based upon scenes from Hill Street Blues. In my head, I've got those characters in Hill Street Blues
Uh-huh.
sort of
Uh-huh.
bouncing off each other, and that's really
Right.
where it's meant to be,
Wow.
really.
Wow. Well, the idea behind it is really novel. I mean, I've never seen the the crucifixion, the Jesus story approached this way, and but it makes a lot of sense because um if you think about those people who were in the either military or the governmental positions,
Hmm.
how they would have viewed the threat that was coming about through the ministry of Jesus, what was happening with him, and we don't normally think of it that way. His own
No,
followers didn't understand him very well at all. So
no.
how could you expect somebody in a government position or a military position, a, a police type position, to understand what was going on? So what your novel does is it gives a peek into how that might have gone through their heads, what some of the things that he said. Maybe they misunderstood, or maybe they got little bits and pieces of it, and it was just so interesting to me to approach it that way.
When I was actually in the writing phase of it, obviously I went back to as many sources as I could, and of course the principal sources for Jesus are the Gospels
Yes. Hmm.
that have come down. And although I'm familiar with the Gospels, as we all are, we live in a
Hmm.
Christian centric culture,
Hmm.
and although I was familiar with them, I'm a Catholic, and
Hmm.
I've gone to church all my life, and they read the gospel, and you listen to it, and you can almost repeat it, but you're not really listening to it most of the time. Anyway, because I was actually trying to build a picture for the novel, I looked at the last days of the ministry, and I was looking at it from a policeman's point of
Hmm.
view, from an
Hmm.
intelligence officer's point of view, in a
Yes.
way.
Yes.
Um, and and for me, the turning point, the whole crucial turning point on this was the raising of what we know as the raising of Lazarus,
Hmm.
the story of Zacchaeus in the tree,
Hmm.
and and um, and then those few days leading up to Palm Sunday, where he comes into Jerusalem. Anyway, and I read it, and as I was reading it with this view, it was like reading something entirely fresh, because um, the story, and this is in the gospel. So the story is there's this man. They've effectively issued a bit of a warrant for him to bring him in for questioning. He hasn't done anything, but they want to question him. But he's being a little bit elusive. Okay, and he goes to Bethany, which is just, I don't know, it's a few miles outside of Jerusalem,
Hmm.
and he does something which either happened or didn't happen or was misreported, or and he raises the dead. Okay, raises a dead man. Well, we can argue whether he did or he didn't, but the fact is that that was what the rumor was.
Hmm.
So then, when the police go to arrest him, the Jewish police, the Pharisees, the Sadducees go arrest him, he does a runner. You know, so off he goes with his disciples, disappears up into the mountains. Well, as a policeman, you're thinking, hang on, he's done something. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, he
Right.
may not have done that, but why is he running away? Then he goes to ground. He goes to ground, disappears off the radar for a few days. And then the next we hear of him in the gospel is that he's marching north 60 miles, which is quite a long way on foot. He's marching north to go back to Galilee. Well, as a policeman who's planning a big event to pass over in a few days' time with this fella who's a bit of an agitator, I started to have a sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness for that. At least he's a problem I'm not going to have to deal with now, you know?
Hmm.
And there he is marching north, goes to Galilee, it says in the gospel, gets to Nazareth, where he's from. Now, at the time, you've got to remember, Nazareth was a hotbed of rebellion. It's where the Zealots were from. It was they were effectively a terrorist organization. He goes there. He then joins up with what can only be described as a mob. It's described in the Gospels as um, um, a group of people on a pilgrimage, but really it's a mob. And
Hmm.
this mob are from Galilee, and these Galileans are terrorists. So he gathers a mob of terrorists and he marches, does nothing more than turn around and march another 60 miles. It's 120 miles in a week back to Jerusalem. And just before he gets to Jerusalem, he gets to Jericho and he goes to the house of the tax collector, who's effectively the local magistrate, the local, important person. And he really gives him an offer he can't refuse. I'm going to use your house tonight. Is that okay?
Hmm.
Yes, of course it's okay. With this mob outside, sort of going, well, if you don't, you're going to get your house wrecked. Now, as a policeman, goodness me, that's so sinister. This is a person of interest now. Something's going to happen. And I think the entire Jesus story hinges on those few days. What happened
Hmm.
after that becomes
Right.
an inevitability, really.
Right. Right.
Um, and and that's what I found fascinating when I reread it, really.
Yeah. Well, uh, you really did do a beautiful job of leading these six characters, and we'll tick them off for people that maybe this will spark some interest. You have Pilate, and of course everybody knows who
Yeah,
Pontius Pilate is, and Pilate's the head of his military operation, or his head centurion. Then you have
yeah,
Caiaphas, and Caiaphas is the
yeah.
temple, the head of the temple guard. And then you have
Well, Caiaphas is
Mhm.
the chief, no, Caiaphas is the chief priest.
Right,
He's
right.
the senior politician
Yes,
within the Jewish
that's right.
hierarchy.
That's right. And then you have Judas, and then Simon the Zealot. So you have these six, and,
Yes,
and what you've done is you've taken them from early in their lives and taken each of their lives, um, and until they get to this point, this crucial point that they all kind of
yeah,
intersect. And
yeah,
that was beautifully done. Um, so that when we talk about characters, as at while we're producing the audiobook, one of the things I ask you to do, and you provided such wonderful information for me. I always like my authors to let me know if you have an actor or a public figure that you would place and cast as that character. And
yes.
you sent me links to scenes with characters that really helped me. And it's not so much that I uh, mimicked, or I didn't do their voices necessarily, but I
No,
took their
it's the
attitude.
cadence, isn't it, boys?
Yes,
It's more like the cadence rather than the
Right.
voice as such.
Cadence and attitude, tone, whatever. But there was some beautiful, like you had one of the Caiaphas as he gets a little older. You had F. Murray Abraham, and that helped
Yes,
me. That helped me.
yeah,
It just to imagine him playing that part.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so there were quite a few that you had, but I just thought it was wonderful that you provided that kind of information for me. So I appreciate that.
yeah.
Um,
One one
mhm.
of the one of the minor characters, I suppose, actually, which I thought was a perfect fit, is Pilot's wife. Okay,
Yes, yes.
so Pilot's wife is only a minor character. She's a minor character in the story, and she's a minor character really in the book, but crucial nonetheless, in the sense that Pilot in my book is a victim of PTSD. When he's young, he
Hmm.
survives the Burger massacre in the legions, and from that, and becomes a PTSD victim. And it's this woman that saves him
Hmm.
and rehabilitates him. But she becomes a victim of her own excesses and a follower of Dionysus and an
Right.
effective drug addict. And I always remember years ago watching. There's a film called 55 Days of Peking, which has got David Niven in it and what's his name? Um, the fellow who was Ben Hur.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
and and in that film, there's Ava Gardner
uh-huh.
is a sort of a, she's only relatively young really at the time when she plays it, but she's quite dissolute and she's a sort of a fallen woman really, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I thought, goodness me, if I'm trying to imagine Pilot's wife as anyone, it's Ava Gardner playing this character in 55 Visa Days of Peking,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it was things like that. You can actually, as I was writing, I could actually see Ava Gardner rather than
Yes.
anybody else, really. You know,
Yes.
so that was an interesting way of doing it, really.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of writers do that. They have voices in their heads, that they're hearing or
Yeah,
seeing characters. So it helps me, or it helps any narrator to have that kind of feedback. Because we don't know,
yes,
we're having to guess most of the time. So anything like that,
hmm,
if you're an author and you're listening to this, that's a good thing to do to help your narrator. Um, so
yes.
so I think we worked well together to bring this production to the place where it needed to be. Um, so I'm trying to think of other ideas, other questions. Well, what do you have anything that you would like to share or ask me about the process?
Well, in terms of your narration, I mean, I'm generally genuinely impressed with. It was so smooth. I mean, I don't know how you get it to be so smooth. I mean, I find your narration quite measured, and yet there were a few times when when I disagreed with something that you'd said, or I
Hmm.
thought you'd misread it,
Hmm.
I mean, for example, there's a couple of pronunciations, isn't there, which in English are different than they are in
Hmm.
American,
Hmm.
and I put no, I want to pronounce it like this, and you said, well, the American audience wouldn't understand that, you
Right.
know,
Right. That was the word
um,
shown, wasn't it?
and
Shown.
you
It was
shown that's
shown.
shown that's right, because it means something different in
Right.
UK English shown,
Yeah,
you see,
the way you
but
were meaning it was different. Yeah.
that's right. So what I'm intrigued about, and I've wanted to ask other narrators this: how do you make it fit so seamlessly? You know, so you record something. Um, I say, well, no, I'm not happy with that, and then you re-record it. But well, there's no way. I've listened to it over and over again, and I can't see how you've cut that in. How do you do it?
Well, there's something that we call punch and roll, and that means I can
Okay.
find if I want to go back and edit something and change the way I did a line, And that happens all
Yes.
the time. I mean, there's a ton of editing that goes on in audiobooks, no matter who the narrator is. But if you punch and roll, you can go back to a place right after the what you did was correct, and then you're going to fix the next. Let's say you're going to fix the next line or two. Well, you go back and you press this, and you can listen to yourself doing the lines leading up to it, and then you just go with it. So it's not doing it out of the blue. You're following your own lead. Does that make sense?
Right. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it does. But that must, I mean, there must be a hell of a lot of skill involved in that, surely.
Yeah, well, there's skill and experience, but there really is there's a lot of technical things that have to happen to for it to edit it so that it is eventually as smooth as possible. Um,
Yes.
but it just takes a little while to learn that. Yeah.
Yeah. This book in itself, I mean, you've obviously narrated many books, haven't you? So, how did you find this book compared to some of the others?
Oh wow. Well, this was my 50th book. That I
Goodness
thought that was
me.
I thought that was a nice round number and a good book to be my 50th book. Um, and I, I was well, this is a story that's very dear to me. I mean, I'm actually a lover and follower of Jesus, so I
Okay.
loved uh, exploring a different way of looking at the story. Every, you know,
Right.
everybody who's ever tried to tell the story is going to tell it a little bit differently. And this one is so unique because it's not, Jesus is almost a side character in this.
Hmm.
Um, he's the center of it, yes, but not not really. It's all it leads up to where he's the center of it. And all this, you know, you you made me feel sympathy and empathy for Pilate and Caiaphas. You know, those um, and things that I had never thought about. Like you say, what did Pilate? Could he have experienced PTSD? Yes, he could have. And that may have been part of what was happening in his mind in his life. So uh, I just thought that was so interesting. So I I appreciated your writing. It's beautiful, and I would suggest to anybody listening to this, if you're an audiobook listener, yes, get the audiobook. But if you're not, buy the book and read it because it's wonderful. And I was so honored to be the voice of it. So I appreciate you
Well, you'll
choosing.
forever be the voice of this boy, won't you? Really. So, one final question, really, for me
Mhm.
is
Sure.
who do you think who do you think the book will appeal to most?
Um, I think it has a wide appeal. And I know you chose an American narrator, even though you've used British narrators for your other books. I
For the
know
evening.
you specifically chose an American narrator to appeal more to the American audience. And I think there are a lot of listeners, a lot of reader listeners who will enjoy this book because it does make you think totally differently about those scenes. It's not necessarily
Right.
that it will make you change your view about Jesus, but it will just make you think about what was happening behind the scenes. And
Yes.
it
Yes.
was just so well done. So um, I've done all kinds of books, and this is definitely up there near the top. So
Well, thank you. Thank you
yeah,
very much
I enjoyed it so
indeed.
much.
It's
Yeah. Well,
thank
I
you. It's
appreciate you.
praise from Caesar. As they say. Praise from Caesar.
Well, I so appreciate you spending the time from Wales, that from
Thank you.
a mountain in Wales,
A rainy,
rainy
dark
Wales.
Wales.
That's great. Well, I appreciate it so much, and it's good to meet you at least like this, and maybe one of these days in person. We'll see. But
That would be lovely.
yeah, well, thank you so much for
Okay,
joining me.
thank you very much for your time, Boyd.
Absolutely. Okay.
And I look forward to maybe meeting you in person one of these days.
That would be
And
wonderful.
if I have another project, you'll be certainly on my
All
call
right.
list. Okay.
Very good. All right. The roads to Golgotha, folks. It's something you need to put on your list. All right. Oh,
All
and
right. Thank you very
and
much
we're
indeed.
coming up to the Easter season, so what better time to listen to it
We
or
are.
read it than the Easter season? So, all right.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, Leonard.
Thank you, Boyd.
All right.
Good night now.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.